our work doesn't necessarily come right out of disability studies. And I think that's the cool part about it. That's to show how like ableism is like found in every way. So that approach to it is not a very linear path towards access and disability. It kind of comes in these different areas, these different intersectionalities. And I think that is uniquely AIM, as we like to say.
Welcome to Unlivable Cultures. Unlivable Cultures is a podcast making with and borrowing from anthropology, social theory, and other forms of knowledge for a more livable world. Today, we have an exciting episode for our De-Institutionalize series on academia. I am talking with a couple of members of the Access in the Making Lab, or AIM Lab as it is abbreviated, from Concordia University. AIM is an anti-colonial, anti-ableist feminist research lab working on issues of access, disability, environment, and care through creative experimentation. We're discussing issues around ableism in academia, the importance of access in its various forms, and the concept of disability as method. My name is Clayton Gerard. My pronouns are he, him. And for an image description, I have pale white skin, dark hair, and black-rimmed glasses. I'm also wearing a black hoodie. And today I am joined with a couple members of the AIM Lab. I will pass it over to each of y'all if y'all wouldn't mind giving an introduction. And I'll start with Prakash, if you're up for it.
Yeah, hello. This is Prakash speaking. Prakash Krishnan. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the coordinator at the AIM Lab. Also in life, I do some art stuff, art adjacent. And yeah, I work as a cultural worker, a cultural mediator, art educator, writer, those kinds of things. But yeah, and so in terms of my image description, I'm a medium complexion, brown skin man in my early 30s. I'm like very cozy in my Beyonce Ivy Park Noir hoodie. I'm in the AIM Lab meeting room, and behind me there's like a collection of whiteboard marker drawings of the different AIM Lab members. Except for me, I don't have one because I said art adjacent because I can't draw. So I'm missing a self-portrait, but that's fine. Okay, now I'll pass it off to Emery.
Yeah, hi, that was lovely. Yeah, my name is Emery Vanderburgh. My pronouns are she, her. Image description, I am a white woman with short brown hair. I'm currently wearing a green hat because it's chilly today in Montreal, slushy and gross. I'm wearing a green cardigan to match my hat. I'm so coordinated. And my background is blurred. A little bit about me. I am an interdisciplinary artist. My work really focuses on community collaboration, centering around issues of access and disability, as well as knowledge translation for the sciences. Right now I'm working on several research and creation projects to involve creating work about neuroscience research, and two are about speculative disability design and flower mutation to frame disability as a valuable form of biodiversity, which I'm working on under the guidance of AIM Lab. So I will pass it along to Nick now.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Emery, and everyone. It's so nice to meet everyone. And hear these introductions again. So my name is Nicholas Goberdhan. You can call me Nick. I am a brown-skinned man with long hair that's in a bun. I'm wearing sunglasses inside because I'm cool. I have piercings and I have a big dark gray hoodie on in the back. I'm inside of my home, and there's a black and white abstract painting to my left, and on the right it is a building, another condominium. My work, I'm a PhD candidate in my 4th year, and my research is on young carers, who are young people 25 and under that care for their disabled loved ones. And my pronouns are he/him. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your introductions and for joining us today. So just to start off, I didn't know if y'all would be willing to kind of briefly describe AIM Lab and, how it's situated within the university and the kind of work that y'all are involved in.
This is Prakash speaking. Maybe I can start with some of the technical logistics of AIM and how it came to be in terms of like the university. Yeah, how such a lab becomes financed and built. In my experience, I think it is quite a unique space. And then maybe Emery and Nick, you can follow up with what is more like, I think, internal to AIM. If I start externally, we can move inwards. Yeah, so AIM, Access in the Making Lab, is a lab that is funded by 2 large funding bodies in Canada. So the first is the Canada Research Chair in Critical Disability Studies and Media Technologies. So that position is attributed to the principal investigator and director of AIM, who is a professor in the Department of Communication Studies here at Concordia University, and her name is Arseli Dokumaci, and she is the director of AIM. And so essentially everyone, or most people who are currently researchers at AIM are funded through her Canada Research Chair, either as research associates like Emery and I, or as research assistants who are students like Nicholas, who is pursuing his PhD. And so that sort of funds the kind of like internal staffing and research of AIM. There's also another big funding source called the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, or maybe it's the Canada Foundation for Innovation. And usually this is a like granting agency that funds what we call like the hard science labs, so things in maybe like physics, chemistry, math, biology, engineering. And if I'm not mistaken, I think AIM is one of the first endeavors that that this funding is going to a humanities-centered lab. So kind of like Emery had mentioned, like I think there are some of us in AIM who do research that like blurs disciplinary lines, but at the core it's like a humanities lab doing mostly kind of like arts-based research, ethnographic research, things that are more qualitative rather than quantitative. But with the funds that came from the CFI, we were able to have a physical like laboratory in the university, which involves like several very interesting features, including the meeting room in which Emery and I are in now, that has like different kinds of accessibility features. All the furniture, or most of the furniture, is mobile. We are also very well equipped with different kinds of media production equipment. So all sorts of cameras, microphones, even like textile works. We're waiting for some 3D printers, vinyl cutters, other kinds of makerspace items, toolkits, etc. Our like goal of investigating questions of access can be done like not only through theoretical methods, but also through creative engagements with different kinds of media technologies. I think I'll stop there for the overview of the external construction of AIM. Maybe I'll pass it on to Emery to discuss some of the internal workings.
Yeah, for me, like AIM is a really intimate space within the institution. I find it a little bit of a sanctuary, especially with how considerate it is on access. So like a lot of what our day-to-day kind of looks like is we'll have meetings to discuss a range of topics, again, because so many people are working at so many different intersections. Yeah, a lot of it is collaboratively focusing on how we can do these sorts of engagements. I'm not sure if that was coherent.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, perfect. I'll pass it to Nick, and maybe you can add to that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that, Emery. One thing that I would like to emphasize with AIM is truly the name. access in the making. And that is not just, a title on top. It's actually a part of our process and the way we do things. There's like certain things that you would consider not really a big thing, but AIM has been quite mindful of it. Like Prakash was saying earlier, like in the construction of like the physical aspects of having mobile furniture. But also in our meetings that we have some individuals who are not present in Montreal, but can Zoom in hybrid and are still a part of the AIM experience. And I think it's those things that really describe access in the making. And also when it came to just constructing our core ethos and what do we actually stand for, those things were all coming together as a process of like iteration, constantly improving. And you know what, maybe one person doesn't disagree with this. How can we ameliorate things and have these conversations to constantly improve on these things? And to me, that was really what stands out about AIM and like access in the making as a lab overall.
That sounds great. And thinking of like the external space in which you're operating, I think it was when I was reading the manifesto, or maybe it was one of the like past projects, but even laying out some of the like really intensive considerations that had to go into even constructing the space and where it's located on campus to be accessible, and the floor it's on and the access and entryways and everything else. Like that's a lot of really important considerations when thinking about access that isn't often thought of as much in like university spaces or just like constructing buildings in general. So this idea of making the AIM lab somewhere that really prioritizes access as it's being created was something that was really cool to read about and hear you discuss a little bit as well. So in this episode, we're talking more about like academia and academic spaces and how AIM Lab fits within that. So I didn't know if y'all would be willing, all of y'all or anyone in particular would be willing to talk sort of about academic ableism and how that shows up in like university spaces, and then just academia in general as like an ivory tower. Like what are some of the issues of ableism that exist that the AIM Lab as access in the making is trying to intervene into?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk coming from a research associate who is a non-academic artist, and the how AIM has kind of facilitated my ability to be here, to be at a university and at this space. It embodies AIM's intervention into academia and ableism, that people with lived experience can be at this space and valued at the same level as researchers. And I think that AIM does prioritize community collaboration, and it's also in a way where people aren't claiming to be researchers in academia, but through our sort of meeting space and our deep consideration for how we present ourselves and the collective care that is part of the kind of artwork that I can do, which has a lot of freedom. I'm not restricted by some of the bureaucratic limitations within an institution. A lot of that work can be informed and even translated, vetted by the researchers here. Yeah.
I think in terms of academic ableism and like the institutionalized ableism, I sort of think about it in like two ways. The first, and I think AIM tries to respond to both of these in different ways. So if you consider, let's say, one area of the institutionalized ableism being like inaccessible spaces, like physically inaccessible spaces. So in terms of AIM's construction, it is like inside of the Department of Communication Studies, like the building that is for communication studies and journalism at Concordia University. But the space that was fought for, that was given, is like quite large. And so Concordia University has two campuses. One is located in downtown Montreal, and the other is in more of a residential area outside of downtown called the Loyola campus. And there are like pros and cons for not being downtown. Like we don't have that same kind of centralized access, easy to get to from the underground metro. However, being over at this campus, there are more options for parking. Adapted transport can like pull up right in front of the building, and we have like much more real estate. So we have like quite a large space compared to other labs that are on the downtown campus. So there could be several people who use mobility aids or wheelchairs or have service animals that can comfortably fit and move around in the space. And the lab is like located kind of almost right at the end of the ramp entrance. It's like right beside a wheelchair accessible washroom, also very proximate to a gender neutral washroom that I believe is also fully accessible. And often like this is like not the case in lots of university spaces, especially older universities that are sort of like limited by the architecture that was like built at a time where no one would have believed that people who were disabled would pursue academics or like academia. And so there are like lots of interventions within the AIM space that address some of these like limitations that I won't like go into any further detail, but a lot of that information is also available on the AIM website. The other area I think of academic ableism that AIM seeks to respond to is kind of like the way that to be successful, quote unquote, within academia often requires you to like leave your personality, identity, disability at the door, and you come only in like pure intellectual thought, divorced from your lived experience. And this is like problematic for like lots of ways. And Arseli, our director, has like written a lot about disability as method and how we can like creatively use our experiences of disability in order to do like rigorous research in both like theory and practice. And so there were like various projects. We were also showing how like there is a lot to learn about the state of the world or about different, I don't know, like what kind of like policy interventions could be made using like centering disability experience as like a core like research method. And the other thing too, like Emery was getting at, like AIM has both people who are pursuing traditional academia, master's students, PhD students, postdocs, but also there are, I believe, 3 of us in AIM's current configuration, myself, Emery, and our designer, Roy Sade, who are not pursuing academia. We're not students. We are here, but we are still here, like doing the work. We are still researchers. We are very actively engaged in these kinds of projects. But I think that this kind of intervention of like quote unquote non-academics into academic spaces, I think also helps to sort of disrupt the ivory tower that you mentioned, Clayton, that like only one kind of person can like be in the space and take up space and produce research. But we're really trying to like democratize the research, engage with different kinds of people, engage with the community, and really underscore how thinking about accessibility as like a core theoretical and practical construct can like really make way for insightful research and theory that otherwise would be ignored in like a more traditional like anthropological context or a communication studies context. That's the end of my thought. Nick, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, thank you for that, Prakash. And to kind of yoke both Prakash's and Emery's ideas together, some of the vivid experiences that I recall is like when we go into the meeting and Arseli brings kale that she picked from her garden, or people are bringing in food. We have these ideas of collective care are really interwoven into the daily experience of being at AIM. And I think that when we think about academic ableism and just that power behind things such as like knitting together, having these conversations, when we start our meetings, there aren't like very corporate style, here's an agenda, bullet points, boom, boom. It's like, let's do a temperature check. Let's see how everyone is doing. And I think that is such a unique aspect to AIM and really defines what we are about. And in terms of like disability as method, disability as care, like having these conversations of bringing us together, I think is really in the way how we challenge like a lot of these ableist notions, as Prakash was saying, that of like just being divorced from who you actually are and just intellectual thought, but instead AIM strives greatly to bring all aspects of you holistically together. And I think that is truly cutting at the power of trying to thwart a lot of the academic ableism that happens at the institution.
Yeah, I love that. And that you mentioned the collective care involved in this space and how that's such a crucial part of just disability justice in general and the activism and politics that have been unfolding from disability activism for generations now. And I was wondering if we could kind of reflect more on that together and kind of how spaces like AIM that are centered around, as you're talking, disability as method and frameworks of disability, as I think, Emery, you mentioned earlier, as like a valuable form of biodiversity. And like, how do these kinds of spaces and collectives really enrich the work of, scholarship and the contributions that's being made?
One thing that comes to my mind, and I could speak about it from personal experience, was that our director, Arseli, had really entrenched what it means to be a disability-focused activist. And things such as conferences that need to have ASL interpreters. Like, that was such an important thing. And I think Arseli has done a great job of living that, not just saying it, but being it, and saying that if there's this conference that doesn't have this ASL interpreters, what is like my politics in relation to that? We come from disability justice, and that should be not only something we write about, but something we are about. And I think deeply about that because even in my own work on young carers, I was at a conference a couple of days ago, and one thing that I had come to understand is that disability politics was actually in conflict with young carers 25 years ago. And there's this long history. And coming into this conversation and being more disability rights, disability justice inclined had just afforded me a level of experience and understanding that I don't think I would have been able to get in other places. And what I found powerful about it is that when I now speak about young carers, for instance, I can have that disability justice understanding. And a very key example of this is that for a lot of young carers, young people with disabled family members, what often happens is that the disabled person becomes demonized. And it's like, this disabled person is a burden. And I think what has allowed me to unpack that is that in terms of disability justice, it's like, that's not what disability is, or that's not even the understanding of care. Care is reciprocal. It goes back and forth between people. And in terms of, Clayton, to answer your question about like the scholarship, I think it's that perspective, that awareness of how can we see the ableism that is entrenched so deeply into a lot of these conversations that we're not even aware of it. And I think that was an anecdotal example of me like demonstrating the power of what AIM Lab has been able to do, and just heighten consciousness and see how ableism is not just like something very visible. It's so deeply entrenched into society. And I'm grateful for that perspective.
Yeah, I love sort of what you're saying, Nick, about how there is already such a rich history and discourse within academia. Like disability studies has existed for a long time, right? We have a lot to draw from. So I think that, again, what Nick is saying, that I understand, because academia and current culture is so entrenched with ableism, we're often put in a place of trying to convince people of the current value of disability or disability justice, especially within places that have historically left us out. But I do think that like what the lab is doing is troubling the word value a little bit, because disability is so intrinsic to a way of being. It exists in, as Nick kind of hinted at, it exists in ways that are unexpected or people wouldn't imagine, and our goal here is to kind of articulate that and showcase that. So it isn't about a justification for inclusion. I think it's just, again, Prakash had already mentioned Arseli's work about disability as a method. There's tangible insights that exists, and we're collectively kind of communicating that.
Yeah, this is Prakash speaking. I think too, like a final point sort of in terms of where our work as a lab is going is really interrogating these questions around access very broadly. So I think we want to expand the notion of access as being something that is like kind of like limited to thinking about disability, because even the framework of disability is very like socially and politically located where we are. So let's say like North America, like Canada, US perspective has like the idea of disability has really come through a very specific kind of activism that a lot of people who do have certain access needs or who might benefit from like accessibility frameworks don't think about or don't ask for or don't inquire because they may or may not identify as being quote unquote disabled, especially as a lot of our work as like individuals within the lab are like responding to different kinds of like perceptions of disability and access outside of a North American context. And like for instance, and Arseli mentions this in her book, Activist Affordances, that a lot of her subjects, you know, are, let's say, like living with arthritis. That was like the principal subject of her book, and yet would not use the language of disability. So if you think about, you know, like what does it mean, you know, if you want to sort of like divest from the discussions, the binary of the social and political models of disability, and think about instead, okay, like what do we all need as people to be able to like participate in life, culture, society, like equally and equitably? What does that mean? So I think it was Nick who mentioned before that all of our meetings are done hybridly. So people are always welcome to like come to AIM to meet. Let's say like right now, Emery and I are physically here at AIM. Nick is joining us from his apartment. Clayton, you're obviously not joining us from Canada, but and yet like, but this is not like, because we're meeting for this podcast, that's not the exception to the rule. All of our meetings are like this, such that, you know, if you can't make it to a meeting, it's not the exception that, okay, I have a disability, I can't physically make it because of my disability, I need accommodations. It's just like this option is always there. So should you just like choose that you don't want to come, or you're having a bad day or a sad day, or you just like don't want to see people, maybe you smell bad, I don't know, like it could be whatever reason, but just that accessibility option is like there, it's available, and anyone can like partake in that. I think that is sort of like a model that we are trying to like bring forth in the way that the lab operates, but also in the way that we are conducting our research and our projects, centering questions around access and less about disability as it's seen from a North American context.
Yeah, I love that, and how in each of your responses you've kind of talked about care in different ways, and like especially talking about access and thinking of like hybrid meetings, like the kind of thoughtfulness and understanding and empathy just in creating this space that can be hybrid and can be adapted to people's needs in the moment. Like there is a care in that, and just being able to create that space and being intentional. And like even Nick, your example of Arseli bringing kale from her garden to share with everybody, like that's just a beautiful moment. And also, a side note, I follow her on Twitter and love seeing just like the pictures of her garden that just seems so luscious and amazing. But yeah, I just love this idea of the reciprocity in care versus just this idea of kind of, as you mentioned also, Nick, almost demonizing people that have different needs with disabilities and different access needs, and kind of the institutional idea of reasonable access always just like infuriates me. Like if you're signing up for a conference or other kind of application or whatever else, it's like, do you have any, reasonable access needs? It's like even the idea of what is reasonable and what is not is just like, I don't know, mind-blowing to me, and the ways in which we don't even think about caring in these spaces so often. To talk about AIM a little more and the work that it does as a research lab. In the description, as I mentioned earlier, AIM is a, quote, anti-colonial, anti-ableist feminist research lab. Would y'all be able to talk a little bit about like what those words mean and how that's operationalized in AIM Lab's work?
Well, I mean, just very simply, like we're positioning ourselves in alignment with those larger themes, and specifically looking at the point where they all intersect through access. I think you can't have access without considering decolonization or feminism. So I think that's sort of our goal here is intervention through access, but access means looking at these intersections.
I don't have much to add to this, but Emery hit exactly what I was going to say. It's hard to speak about like anti-colonial, the theme of being anti-colonial, and not speak about anti-ableism. And I think that what that statement right at the beginning is to just really know like where we stand in terms of oppression, marginalization, and so forth. Prakash.
Yeah, to follow up on what Nick is saying, like going back, Clayton, to what you were saying about academic ableism and institutionalized ableism, like there is kind of like a certain model character figure who is like the successful academic, and this is like based off of a model of typically an able-bodied white man in a Canadian American context, also one that comes from enough like class privilege in order to be able to attend university post-secondary education without facing the realities of like crushing debt or hiking tuition, etc. And so basically all of us in the lab are coming into this work from very different locations. Not all of us are Canadian or grew up in Canada, regardless of our citizenship status. We have each very unique academic pathways. I'm a former health physicist, and then over the last decade have transitioned into an arts career. But I have a certain very traditional academic training that was not serving me. All this to say that we come in with different worldviews, different experiences, and in order to have a space in which all of these perspectives are heard, are valued, in order to make decisions that are going to benefit the collective, we are obliged to have a feminist ethics in that work. I feel we really draw from some of the writings of bell hooks in terms of teaching to transgress and the classroom as a radical space of pedagogy. Those might not be the exact titles, but the ideas being that the work that we're producing has a certain kind of research value, pedagogical value that is quite radical within these deeply institutionalized spaces. And part of what AIM is trying to do is really, I think, separate ourselves from the academic identity, that we are not this thing out of Concordia, but we are our own entity. And then also a big part of understanding that in these broader questions about accessibility, there is an interrogation that we must undergo in terms of what does it mean to talk about access, to create an anti-ableist space, a feminist space within stolen lands. So for people listening who are less familiar with maybe Canadian history or geography, but Montreal is an island, and this is this area of Quebec is the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people, or the Mohawk Nation. The traditional Kanien'kehá:ka name for Montreal is Tiohtià:ke. The Anishinaabe are another Indigenous First Nations in Canada and the US who have also inhabited this territory. Their name for Montreal is Muniang. And we have been in constant discussion both within and with like other Indigenous folks outside of the lab in order to figure out like what is the best way to embed also an anti-colonial ethic and critique within our work, understanding that we do this work in an institution that is deeply colonial and yet are trying to work against the grain in all of these ways in terms of like bringing a feminist ethics of care, of collaboration, of physically creating a space that, you know, works to accommodate, that is as accessible as possible, and that also addresses the fact that we do this work on stolen land and how to create work that, is rooted in care such that we are, I don't know if like lessening the impact is like the correct way of thinking about it, but to, bring this politic that underscores the way in which we're only able to do this work because of the ways that the land has been exploited and the ways that access to life, to land, to the waters, etc., has been taken away from Indigenous people in Canada, and we're like continuously interrogating that fact within different aspects of our work. But it's like together, I think like really these three components of anti-colonialism, anti-ableism, and feminism like cannot be extracted from one another and cannot be extracted from like the work that we're doing.
Thank you for speaking to that. I would love, if you don't mind, to continue along this thread of talking about access. The AIM Lab talks about thinking of access and approaching it in like a multidimensional, intersectional way. And kind of, as you were getting at, not just talking about access in the sense of like accessible buildings and like ramps and elevators, but also access to clean water and fresh foods and like natural spaces. Can you talk about how that kind of multidimensional consideration of access is reflected in the AIM Lab's work and various projects, or, you know, various ways that you approach your own research and creation?
I could start this question off. The first thing that comes to my mind is that there's a lot of creativity inside of the lab. So for instance, we also have a project going on called Reading for Palestine, and everyone's approach to it has some degree of variation. We have certain people who are creating images. Certain people are reading very heavy academic texts. Some are reading novels. And I think like that conversation in and of itself shows like this almost like multi-dimensional different ways of approaching this conversation. And how can we educate ourselves, but through like different means. And I think like that is incredibly important, because often when we think about academia, it is very rigid, it is very dense, it's very, you know, the kind of thing people think about. You have the book and it's very complicated text. But I think what AIM does really well is to show these different sides of the conversation. Like when we speak about the multidimensional and intersectional approach to access, I cannot help but also emphasize just like things that I've been saying earlier, just on our approach, just like having the temperature checks, having the care conversations. You know, if you're not feeling well, we have a Discord channel where we like message people and say, hey, you know, I can't make it today. Oh, checking in on people, sharing our achievements. And I think to me, when we speak about like multi-dimensional, like yes, there is care, there is sending emails of like, I can't attend today. But then where AIM really highlights is like beneath all of that, it's to show that reciprocity. Oh, you're not feeling well, sending warm wishes to you. Like that I find is quite rare to find, where someone genuinely cares about how you're feeling and how you're doing. So I think like in the multi-dimensional perspective, there's that. Also with intersectionality, I think that one thing that really strikes me is how different everyone's work is at the AIM Lab. I think this has been emphasized already, but everyone's approach to the AIM Lab, it's like our work doesn't necessarily come right out of disability studies. And I think that's the cool part about it. That's to show how like ableism is like found in every way. So that approach to it is not a very linear path towards access and disability. It kind of comes in these different areas, these different intersectionalities. And I think that is that is uniquely AIM, as we like to say.
I think like the only thing that I would emphasize is, multi-dimensional means like multi-sensory, right? Like we are looking at things from, or we're, I lost my thought. I guess it is like utilizing various creative approaches to talk about issues of environment, ableism, that kind of thing. I think, I don't remember my thought.
I think I can pick up your thought, that is, in terms of this like multi-sensory approach, that we are engaged in our individual practices, but also as lab projects that integrate different forms of media, because no one form will be accessible to all publics. And so there are some of us who are kind of like more like trained within like a traditional academic framework. So a lot of traditional kinds of research, writing, producing academic publications, which are also like really important as an important currency in the realm of academia. And so we still do those. There is also, I think, a negotiation that's constantly being made with an aim of the inside-outside academia, and part of the realities of, trying to create a radical space within the institution, is you still sort of have to abide by certain institutional norms, such as reporting, seeking funding, producing like quote unquote valued research or whatnot. So there's that, but there are also among the AIM members like lots of very interesting image makers, working in graphic design, working in photography, working in moving image, people working in textiles, printing, different kinds of like 2D, two-dimensional kind of like graphic art. Actually, I can't remember if Nick mentioned it, but behind him there is like, I think it's a charcoal drawing that he did together with Rachel Rosansky, who's another artist and researcher and PhD student in AIM. And then again, like we are like looking for ways to even make these different forms increasingly accessible. Nick mentioned the Reading for Palestine project. So all of those recordings, come with a transcript. So if reading is not accessible, there's a recording. If the listening is not accessible, there is the transcript version, so you could read. Another project I'd want to highlight quickly is the Air, River, Sea, Soil: A History of Exploited Land, which was it's still online. People can go check it out. I highly recommend. But it's like a curated image web exhibition curated by Roy Sade from the lab that features 6 artists working across different regions within Botswana, Southwest Asia, and North Africa. And each of these images are paired with an image description, but we worked in our, like Nick said, our uniquely AIM way to find a methodology of description writing that sort of like tries to decenter the idea of an omniscient describer who is giving you the facts of the image. Instead, they are written extremely subjectively on purpose, in dialogue with the artist, in order to like make these images accessible both like in a more literal sense, so people can understand what is in the image content-wise, but also this additional kind of accessibility into like the nature of the image, the spirit of the image, the intentions the artists were trying to convey. And so these sort of like multi-sensory, multi-pronged approach to like not just having one product and sort of like being like wiping our hands, being okay, we did it, we produced the research, but like continuously striving to like find ways to circulate that research, make it creative, involve people outside of academia, get these different perspectives, and like not sort of like be limited to the idealized academic subject within like a neoliberal institutional context.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking to that. And I'd love to continue along talking about like the creative approaches that AIM takes in a lot of the work and projects. I was reading some of the various previous projects and projects that are underway that AIM has been working on. And it's just super fascinating to think about, like, you know, the ways that a lot of y'all have incorporated art into this scholarship, activism, research, and like exhibitions to show, you know, disability as method and the knowledge and care that's inherent in a lot of the disability communities and care collectives that already exist. One of the projects that I looked at as an example was the audio description and the making online exhibition. So part of the description for that project reads, quote, "Beginning from a place that centers the experiences of those who are blind and recognizes the art in audio description, the workshop invited participants to reflect critically both on visual information and to view it as more than mere access. It encouraged creativity not only through describing an image or object, but recognizing how description can generate new art." So would one of y'all be willing to share a little bit about that project? And then also maybe we could have a broader conversation to reflect on art being accessible and the possibilities that can be created when we think about accessibility as also being part of like an art form.
Nick, you were in the workshop, right? Do you want to give that description?
Yeah, we were a part of this workshop, and it was a very interesting experience because I think for some of us, it was our first time really engaging with audio description and like learning how to write. And there were so many things that came out of it. Prakash, perhaps you could do like a better description of the project. And I could talk about like certain things that really struck out in terms of like intersectionality. Could we do that? Prakash, if you'd like to speak about the overview.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the audio description in the making exhibition, where it was kind of like a showcase of these micro artistic projects that were produced out of a workshop series that we did with two facilitators, Cheryl Green and Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed is a blind podcaster and I believe also a narrator. Cheryl Green, she is sighted and is a professional audio describer, so doing audio descriptions for movies, TV, that kind of thing. And so yeah, they led us through, I believe it was like a three session long workshop in which we were like learning kind of like the principles of audio description and sort of like some of the like political questions that are raised in contemporary practices of audio description, and highlighting to like the subjectivity of the describer and technical constraints, these kinds of things. And so from that, we were given the prompt to like sort of like create an artwork that stems from these ideas of audio description. So I can describe my project, and maybe Nick, you can describe yours. So the one, so I participated in the project alongside another AIM lab member, Sabrina Ward Kimola, and we created a piece that's called The Left Hand Guides. I'm pretty sure it's been a while. Essentially, we were inspired by the book cover of an Ursula K. Le Guin novel called The Left Hand of Darkness, and kind of like inspired by what we saw from the cover, we with the two of us created an audio description for that cover, and then like transformed that into like a guided meditation, and then use that meditation to then create a new like backdrop, like a fictional book cover. And yeah, so if you like look at that piece, you will like see a video of this like dynamic book cover alongside our voices, like leading this guided meditation inspired by the original novel cover. And each individual or group who participated sort of took up this prompt in different ways. So maybe I'll let Nick provide his example.
Yeah, like Prakash said, it's been a while to reflect on that, but yeah, I had ended up working on a project with another person who was affiliated with the AIM Lab. And what came out of that is we were looking at a painting and we had created this conversation through description. And it was almost like a rap poetry kind of thing intertwined with looking at accessibility and pointing out certain aspects of the painting. But what I want to come back to is the idea of intersectionality and, being multidimensional. Was that in this workshop, some of the political questions were things such as, how would people identify, and what about if I'm writing a description on someone else's behalf, how do I choose to identify them? Like for myself, do I say that I'm brown? Like, how would I know that someone else wants that? So there are these intricacies, these like deep political intricacies that are embedded inside of description. And I personally wasn't even aware of that. My kind of understanding was I'm just going to make a description and that's it. But there is so much consideration, and it becomes quite political in the way that you do description. So beyond the projects, it was that kind of knowledge. And this knowledge also fueled and paved a lot of the path for some of the projects we had, such as the anti-racist pedagogy platform, accessibilization. Like those projects came out of a lot of this knowledge that we were beginning to learn. And I think that to me was like the really important part in demonstrating how powerful description is. It is not just something that you are, kind of detailing what this is. It goes a lot deeper. And it's actually quite powerful that you can have a conversation that comes out of it.
Yeah, quickly, I think that was our first project as a lab that was like really investigating the kind of creative approaches that arise from centering a disability or accessibility framework. But Emery, I think, is much more experienced in this like line of artistic inquisitions. Maybe Emery, if you want to spotlight some of the work you have done or you are doing.
Yeah, thank you, Prakash. I am a physically disabled artist, and a lot of my work initially was about sort of that, exploring life in a disabled body in a creative way. I've just finished a piece about rotoscoping disabled movement. So I had models with both invisible and visible disabilities performing different movement sequences, and then I traced those sequences frame by frame. And yeah, I'm really interested in how we can, centering on disability, create sort of these creative cultural interventions.
Yeah, I find these conversations really interesting, and I'm trying to think of the artist and the installation, but I cannot for the life of me remember who it was. But I remember reading Disability, Visibility, and there's one chapter in there where an artist talks about their like art piece just of creating ramps and like movement art in a way that provokes conversations and considerations of like access not being this like, stale, one-dimensional, boring thing of just like a ramp to a building, but something that actually can be an art form and something that can be, life-giving and ways that are inspiring. So I think that a lot of AIM's work in engaging this creativity and disability as method and, bringing care into conversations and the political questions that it brings up is super interesting. And even just hearing you reflect on the political questions that come up when you're engaging in audio description and, who's describing what and how are they describing these things is they're very important questions that we often don't consider when we're like, just hearing the audio descriptions after the fact. So I really enjoy hearing about, those kinds of projects that you're engaged with. And I also just wanted to open up for discussion if there's any other projects you'd like to share about or put a spotlight on that you've been involved with, or that other members of the AIM Lab have been involved with, that you would like to just bring up for everybody to hear about.
There is one long form ongoing project that I'll speak about briefly, which is called Mobilizing Disability Survival Skills for the Urgencies of the Anthropocene, which is a very long title, but I think also resumes, actually not the word resumes, that sums up the kind of different factions of that project. So going back to the idea of thinking about access broadly, there is also a certain kind of framework about thinking about the kind of division between able-bodiedness and disability, that it's not so clear-cut, but also with time the likelihood that you become disabled increases. So as a political framework or identity, people might refer to themselves as being temporarily able-bodied. And I think something that is becoming more and more unignorable is the ways in which the ongoing climate catastrophes plural, is limiting our access to life, to ways of life, to different people's traditional territories, lands, etc. And so as part of this project, the project is sort of split into several micro projects, and people can read about these individual projects on the AIM website, which is accessinthemaking.ca. Yeah, people are engaging in these questions very broadly and using very different creative media engagements. So there's a couple projects that are really rooted in an artistic exploration of disability, following the lines of Emery's, talking about her work. There are others who are doing more kind of traditional academic research. There is documentaries that are being made, different kind of photographic-based projects. And so I think that's something that's still in the works, but I feel is, if people are interested in these topics, it's worth checking out and revisiting. I just want to, again, highlight the project that Nick was talking about, Reading for Palestine. In terms of our anti-colonial commitments, we think it's really important, as a lab, to sort of state that we can't be doing this work of global scholarship and anti-colonialism within a Canadian context without thinking about the ways that colonialism is a global phenomenon, and to be beholden to one anti-colonial struggle such as that in Canada. We are therefore also beholden to supporting all of the anti-colonial struggles across the world, such as the one for Palestinian freedom and liberation. So that's also a project that's ongoing. The web page is being updated on a regular basis as additional recordings come through. So if people are, interpolated by that topic, I would also highly suggest folks go and take a listen and or read on our website.
Okay, yeah, I can. I want to add this here, and I say this quite poetically, in that, Clayton, you had asked the projects we're working on, and I'd like to say this, that AIM in and of itself is a project, and to highlight the idea of access in the making, and that in the making part is really important, because I think what's interesting or uniquely AIM about our approach is that we demonstrate that there is no finish line for access. It's not like we're going to do this thing and check off this list and we're going to get access. It's more so constantly developing and growing. And that to me is the biggest project that we're working on. Yeah, I just wanted to really highlight and emphasize that point there as a closing remark.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any other just closing thoughts, anything more generally any of y'all would like to share?
A parting word of wisdom or encouragement. I'm not sure if it's very wise, but yeah, I'm assuming the listenership are people who are either academics or academically inclined, and we've had this like conversation about the difficulties of working within academia or working against it or being in it but being upset about it or being upset with it. That there are all sorts of like negotiations that are always at play, and the work of de-ableizing, I'm not sure that's the word, but the work to like make the university accessible and not so ableist is not easy. It won't be quick, but it is like, I personally think that it's work that's like worth doing. And then each generation that like tries hard and struggles and fails, like, hopefully create some cracks in the foundations for the next generation to come. And I feel I've already seen that sort of take place here with AIM, that there are other people who have more institutional power who are noticing, who are taking note, and then other changes within the building are happening and within the university, and that work will probably be quite slow and very frustrating. But I think that if you're really like committed to this work and you find ways to remain passionate about it, but which I think also requires like a lot of like collective care, that this is work that like cannot and must not be done alone, but really be done like in and with community. So yeah, persevere. That's my my final thought. But it's really valuable work, and yeah, I support people who are struggling in this field and to do this work. But it doesn't go unseen. It's really important.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up this conversation. So once again, thank you so much, Prakash, Emery, and Nick, for joining me today and talking about the AIM Lab and the work that you all are doing for access in the making and these care collectives and reciprocal relations that AIM is modeling. So thank you for taking the time with me today to discuss those pieces. Just in closing, are there any like places you'd like people to find you or follow your work?
Yeah, you can find all the relevant information on accessinthemaking.ca. Our socials for most places are at accessmaking, and there too you can probably find all of the individual AIM Lab members and their projects if you search through the following page. But also on our website, each AIM member has a pretty elaborate profile, so you could also find out particular information about each person there. There are also lots of other resources on the AIM website, such as our manifesto, like you mentioned before, Clayton, our values, our principles, also all sorts of protocols about how we as AIM run the space, rooted in ethics of anti-colonialism, anti-ableism, and feminism, including a guide on how to create accessible events and how to run hybrid meetings. So if people are looking for resources to how to get started doing those things, if you were so inspired by this conversation, all that information is on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.